Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 10 of The Familiar of Zero, Night of the Twin Moons. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, things are interesting. The Chastain Academy of Magic was saved, and the people who sought to despoil it were all killed, but at the same time, Colbert sort of revealed himself to be the person behind the burning of Agnes's village, and he also died. So, it's decidedly not a wholly good thing. But now, at the same time, it seems as though Queen Henrietta is, plotting more military maneuvers here, specifically in Albion, and how, things need to happen, essentially. There are military targets where large resistances are expected to be mounted, so, oh dear. They're really treating Louise like an ICBM here. It's like, look, this city is expected to pose a lot of resistance, so you need to go there and wipe out the enemy army with your void magic so that, civilians don't get caught up in the war. And I guess understandably the Queen's saying I'd rather avoid this if possible, but it seems like it isn't possible. So the question is, what now? Because it really does seem like Louise and Saito are being sent in alone. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. Now, from the get-go, well, I take it back. I was going to say, I wonder how Saito and Louise are going to infiltrate the flying island of Albion, but I guess it's fairly obvious in retrospect. Saito will just fly him there with the dragon's plumage. Of course, this does raise another much bigger issue in that they're going alone. If this is essentially a stealth mission, they might be able to pull it off, but if, a mage and her familiar are going to take on and defeat an army, it's no small thing. It's not something they can do on even terms, so, alternative tactics are going to have to be pursued, or, subterfuge. And I guess Saito's also raising the salient point of, look, are you even capable of doing this? Because, void magic is highly potent and all that, but can Louise truly call on it when it's needed? And, the answer so far seems to be, kind of maybe allegedly. Her track record as a mage doesn't inspire much confidence, but, whenever it's come to void magic, she's been able to do it. Although, unfortunately, now seems to be a rather significant outlier in that regard. She was trying to, cast this spell, but, unfortunately, it didn't work. So I guess the question is, what now, Derflinger seems to know that, this void magic isn't something Louise can just readily do at the drop of a hat. It's something that's got to be prepared for. And, the last time she did something really spectacular with void magic, it was because she effectively hadn't cast anything her entire life. And, it does make sense to a degree. It's kind of like in music. You know, like when a band puts out an album, they've essentially spent their entire lives up until then writing that album, and then like the second album's written in the time from the first to the second. So, you know, there can be differentials in quality. Now, unfortunately, the realities of void magic are butting up against the realities of aerial combat. You know, like Saito's got to fight off these Dragon Knights, and while his plane is no doubt more than a match for him, does he still have bullets? I guess he does, but I was under the impression that he had depleted all his ammunition in, the previous season, the climax of it. So, that said, you know, a plane is still a relatively fragile thing in my mind, and, you know, it is sort of vulnerable. Given that what we saw of the preview for this episode at the end of the previous one, I think it's safe to say that things aren't going to go entirely well. I mean, Saito's already having to make an emergency landing in the snowy mountains. Like, that's no good thing. I feel like the plane's going to get pretty darn banged up, but that aside, they're going to have to survive in a cold climate. Ooh. So, the general here, for I assume he's a general, he's saying like, look, it was a mistake to rely on magic. You know, that was his idea. And yeah, it is true that it was probably not a great idea. Maybe you could have done like something a little bit different, like gain a foothold from which you could safely use the magic, but I guess it's neither here nor there. You know, the worst thing is that Queen Henrietta has essentially, in her mind, sacrificed her friend for nothing. And, you know, that's a real bitter pill to swallow, I imagine. Now, to Louise's credit, you know, she's more concerned about apologizing for failing to do something. And I get it, but at the same time, maybe focus on escaping from enemy territory with your life, you know? Because, like, you do have to worry about the enemy. They are around, but you also have to worry about the extreme inclement weather. Now, it seems to me that this is something of a trope that came up quite a while ago, back when the Familiar Zero was new. The idea that two people are stranded in cold weather and that in order to survive they need to share body heat. And, you know, I can understand why Saito would make that suggestion, if only because he wants to live. But at the same time, like, I seem to recall this cropped up in, like, Toradora 2 and other stuff. And, you know, Toradora, while not, like, nominally related to the Familiar Zero, there are certain similarities between this and it, so I guess it just kind of makes sense. Man, I feel like, Louise should probably learn her lesson at some point, that, like, maybe when the situation's not good, I shouldn't, beat Saito, because, like, yeah, sure, we are, like, on the verge of freezing to death in, you know, sub-freezing weather, but I think I will just slap my familiar around, and, you know, maybe you shouldn't do that. Now, I'm not an expert on the matter, but something tells me that, like, stripping down to share body heat skin to skin, like, it seems to me that that's probably counterproductive. Like, yeah, it probably is a good thing to have skin to skin contact, but at the same time, you know, if you take off all your clothes, then you're just liable to be affected by the weather. I don't know. Maybe there's a reason why it works, and I'm just, you know, not privy to it, but, oh dear. So it is sort of unfortunate that Saito's not privy to what had happened, if only because he and Louise might be better off for it. So interestingly, Sheffield, you know, the nominal leader of Reconquista, she has decided that rather than reinforce South Gotha, the city Louise was tasked with liberating, they're instead sort of pulling out and withdrawing with all the food and resources they can manage. And I guess it's kind of understandable. It's sort of a common tactic, you know, if you're expecting an enemy army to make landfall and sort of like head there and do stuff, then, like, you really want to leave them as little as possible. You know, in a more extreme situation, Sheffield would probably be ordering them to, like, burn everything, too. You know, burn the crops, burn the homes, burn everything to the ground. Just because in inclement weather like this, then, you know, the soldiers would have no real place to take shelter but what they can construct for themselves. And, you know, that's surely a less than ideal thing. Now, speaking of less than ideal, Saito has stumbled across an enemy soldier that he himself downed, and, you know, the guy wanted to make a fight of it, but he's clearly wounded, so, you know, what are you gonna do? Unfortunately, Louise is, ordering Saito to carry the guy around, and it's like, I get it, you know, you don't want to leave him to freeze to death or nothing, but, there is an easy solution to the problem, as it were. Now, maybe Louise is thinking Machiavellianly, if that's in fact a word. You know, she's thinking about, like, how this could benefit her. Like, you take this guy prisoner. Unfortunately, I think she's probably thinking along the lines of what Colbert said, that, you know, even in war, you shouldn't kill. And, I don't know, man. I still can't quite agree with that. Like, I'm not saying you should just kill the guy, but if the alternative is him freezing to death slowly while injured or dying quickly, maybe it's the more merciful thing to do, especially considering he's an enemy, and you can't exactly take care of yourself at the time being. I mean, in a sense, the guy's really lucky, this poor guy, just because he is wounded, and he's not really capable of fighting Saito one-on-one, and, you know, both Saito and Louise are unwilling to put him out of his misery. Yeah, you know, that's kind of the final nail in the coffin. Saito saying, like, look, I'm not an aristocrat, but I don't like war and I don't like killing. Like, I don't know, man. If you're stranded in enemy territory, like, it might be over for you if you don't get over the idea of killing. Like, not that you have to do it at every opportunity, but, I don't know. I feel you just can't be allergic to it out of hand. Alright. You know, in a weird sort of way, Saito's kind of in the right here, giving that guy back his trinket. And I guess, you know, it is sort of, what would you call it? Like, I wouldn't necessarily say spiteful like Saito, but, like, it is kind of, unnecessarily cruel to withhold something like that from a guy you really can't fight back. And, you know, beyond all of that, like, Louise is putting a lot on the guy who's, you know, carrying the wounded soldier here. You know, he's doing all the heavy lifting. So it seems like we might be getting a little bit more thoughtful here. You know, Louise pondering how she might report her failure. And, I don't know, I feel like you don't have to dress it up in flowery language all that much. It's just like, look, you know, the void magic did not manifest. You know, I failed to perform. You don't have to say too much more than that, but I guess, you know, Louise is understandably not too happy about failure. You know, she's had enough of it for one life. She doesn't want any more, but, I don't know. I feel like the fact that she is the one and only void mage that anyone knows of, like, that would probably spare her from any real punishment for failure. Because, like, think of it this way. If she sticks around and persists and tries to complete the mission and gets herself killed, then, you know, Tristane is well and truly worse off for it. You know, one strategic objective is not worth the asset, as it were. You know, never mind that this asset is also a person, but, like, it's like you wouldn't trade, like, a one-of-a-kind tank you have just to take one objective, you know? It's better to have the tank in perpetuity. Now, it is something that, despite the low reputation this guy has of Tristane nobles, you know, Louise has sort of won him around a little bit. Not that he's, you know, willing to defect or anything, I'm sure, but I guess there is a grudging respect, and perhaps that might come in handy later. You know, like, I can only imagine that if Louise and Saito were to be caught by an Albion patrol, you know, this guy, Henry, as he calls himself, like, he might vouch on their behalf, saying that, like, look, rather than kill these people, maybe just, like, you know, hold them hostage for the time being, turn them over to Queen Henrietta, you know, ransom them off, as it were, just because, like, someone like Louise, she's certainly more valuable alive than dead. I mean, I guess when you get down to it, like, Albion's not exactly doing super great in their war effort. No one really seems to be doing all that well, but, having a noblewoman you can ransom off, like, that's not a card you can dismiss out of hand. It might be something worth holding on to. Now, unfortunately, Henry's laying it on a bit thick here. His dragon mount died in the battle, or rather after the battle, as a result of the battle. But, there's an obvious comparison to draw between the dragon and Saito, that, the dragon was a treasured companion and all that, but, I don't know, man. Like, it is war. I think at some point you just have to accept that casualties will occur. And at the same time, Henry is making a good point that, like, look, this is war after all. If you didn't kill me, I would have killed you. So, I do, in a vague sense, sort of admire for Saito to clinging to his beliefs here, but at the same time, I can't help but shake the feeling that eventually there will come a scenario where it truly is kill or be killed, and, anyone in that situation, like, anyone rational, I think, would pick kill as opposed to be killed. Alright, so Saito's just doubling down. It's like, look, I would want to save Queen Henrietta, I would want to save Louise, but I wouldn't want to kill to do it. And I guess Louise makes a good point that, he does not have the aristocratic upbringing they do, therefore he wouldn't understand pride and honor and things like that. And that's not necessarily true, but he certainly doesn't believe in it the same way Louise does. Probably to everyone's detriment in the long run. Because I guess the question is, when things truly come down to it, what choice will Saito make? And, if memory serves, I think I know what this is leading up to, and he will in fact make a choice. So that's something. Henry's saying that an aristocrat wouldn't hesitate to break up with the one they love and say goodbye when they go off to war. So that's a little grim. He's making it clear that, he broke things off in the event that he did die. He dissolved an engagement with his fiancée. And I get it. I get why you would do that, but I don't know if I could bring myself to do it. Similarly, with Saito in the position that he is, like, he doesn't have the option, much less, I would imagine, the inclination. Now, it is interesting that he holds this against Henry. I don't think that's fair, necessarily. If you do this to spare, the poor woman, like, I can understand doing that, It wouldn't be easy, it's a very difficult thing to do, and I imagine Henry did struggle with it, but I don't know. Saito seems a little bit rattled, disproportionately in my mind. Now, I guess this all sort of comes back to the idea that Saito doesn't much like the idea of killing, that, Henry being willing and accepting of the possibility of death, that's understandably disconcerting. Most of us don't deal with death in our day-to-day lives, so the possibility of it is rather grim. And lest we forget, Saito did sort of come from the same sort of world we live in now, albeit, a couple decades off. Now this is something, Louise, in a weird, bizarre way, is the voice of reason. That, like, look, yes, you did break off that engagement, but I'm sure if you return alive, she'd take you back right away. And, there's probably a good deal of truth to that. So, unfortunately, it seems like I was kind of right about Saito and Louise potentially being taken hostage by a patrol. This patrol is likely not searching for them specifically, but I guess, if they stumble across them, they'll take any opportunity they can get. So, I wonder what's going on here. With Saito and Louise sort of hiding and Henry not immediately selling them out, I'm wondering if he's sort of doing them a solid. They didn't kill him, so he's misdirecting the patrol. It would be, a good and honorable thing to do. And I guess it seems like that is what's going on. Never mind, it seems like it might in fact be over, with another dragon arriving. Oh dear, and it's Giulio of all people. That's perhaps the thing that makes it hurt the worst, that, Giulio, intending to help, has really just sort of brought them under fire, because, dragons all well and good, but if they have firearms, there's no guarantee you're gonna get away without taking a stray shot to the back. I mean, I suppose they have, they've gotten away scot-free, but, they're still flying over enemy airspace, and the enemy also has dragons of their own, so I guess the question is Giulio truly going to get them out scot-free? Well, it seems like he has, and, that's good. Nice and reassuring. But I guess the question is, what now? Queen Henrietta is more relieved that Saito and Louise are alive rather than upset at them for failing, but I guess understandably Louise is upset with herself, So even though the strategic victory was still achieved, capturing Gotha when the Albions fled, Louise is still dead set on doing something, like, look, I need to atone and do something for my failure. And, asking for a dangerous mission is something. I feel like maybe the Queen could say, Louise, knock it off. And if anyone could do so, it would be the Queen, but, I don't know. Something tells me Henrietta doesn't have it in her to necessarily tell Louise to calm down. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.